Whoa. Hello, welcome to the Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates. I don't know what's going on with this video. It's crazy. I mean, if you want to look at the ladder behind me, so we go. That looks a little bit better. Anyways, maybe it'll turn the background back on. Is that helpful? I guess so. All right, we're here. We're welcome back to the Space Between Ideas. We're doing the history challenge where we're going through history. We're trying to understand what's going on. We're reading books. We're getting smart. You know, the thing is, like, I added this playlist on the X platform, and it's because, like, I don't know, I say like lots of crazy stuff on X, and maybe you can't exactly long form talk about what you want to say on X. You can just kind of like talk about the impressions that you have, the things that you're seeing in the news, the things that you think might happen in the world. You know, you're just kind of sharing your insight, and sometimes those insights, they look a little bit crazy. But you know what else is crazy? Let's talk about this craziness today. So I have this general philosophy about life on planet Earth, and it comes from the background which I experienced growing up in Canada. And I would say in general that, like, growing up in Canada was pretty awesome. So, but then you have to you realize eventually that you know, life in Canada is not the same as life everywhere else. Uh-oh, we got a problem here. Okay. When I smiled, I have a problem with my earphones. Something happens. Anyways, let's get into the presentation. All right, so the thing is that, like, there's some issues about world history, and you don't really understand issues about world history until you kind of get into the process of thinking about world history. So here we are. We're thinking about the process of world history, and yeah, the thing about a country, you have to get people to be excited about your country and to be interested in supporting the cause of your people, your community, your cities. You want people to pay taxes. You want people to fight with their blood, sweat, and tears. So the government has to get everybody on board, and if you can't get people on board, then you're going to have a problem with managing your country. The thing you need is a huge amount of resources. Sometimes, um, let's check this audio, make sure we got it. Here we go. Actually, it's good. Perfect. All right, let's get back onto it. What I'm finding out is that life is pretty crazy. And I mean, today we're going to talk about the Opium Wars. So in previous videos, we kind of talked about the development of the difference between growing up in a temperate climate and growing up in a non-temperate climate. And then eventually we started talking about how the Iron Age and tools really changed the way that Europe was able to develop, because they had the advantage of the temperate climate and the consistent long-term rain, and the nutrition and animal protein, and there's just so many advantages that the Europeans had, and what they turned it into was like some kind of, I don't know, they just became crazy. They started going around the world and killing everybody and stealing their goods. The Chinese, on the other hand, they decided to close themselves off from the rest of the world. And then suddenly, in today, what we're going to talk about is what happens when finally Europe decides to go and start doing business and trade with China. Shocker, it was not a very fun experience. And you kind of like, you look at the way the world is going right now, and you ask the question, okay, so you got this Islamic regime. Okay, so how many countries in the world believe that a religion should be in charge of the government? I found my old university graduation thesis, and I went to China for university. I studied Chinese law, and my graduation thesis was called the freedom of religion in China, which was interesting because at this time, this was in 2009, and at this time, there was to some extent there was some opening up, and China was starting to experience like more freedoms and more opening up and more exchanges and more and I remember walking down the street one day and there was this little kid. One kid was like, "Yeah, I have rights," and then the other kid's like, "We not only have rights, but we have responsibilities." And I'm like, "You guys are like 12 years old. What are you talking about?" So it was like being taught in school, like the concept of I have human rights. I have you have to value my you have to give me space to express myself. And that period of China supposedly, depending on who you ask, that time ended with the change of government, which happened shortly after that. Now, I don't really know because I completely shut off my connection with China for about 10 years. I was in China for 10 years and then I left for 10 years. So I really don't know what happened in China under Xi Jinping. And I'm just now like getting back into my China studies and getting back into the news and just trying to see like what is going on in China. And the thing is that like it's easy to say America, the beautiful America is a democratic country. America is always right in everything that it does. America's awesome. You know, there's a song like I'm I'm glad to be an American, or at least I know I'm free. It's something like that. Remember that song? To bomb people in all their countries around the world because their bombs can't hit me. So that I don't know. I can't remember exactly what the song is like, but like so there is this idea that the freedom of religion and then also that there should be some kind of separation between church and state. Um, in my graduation thesis, I went through some of the history in China and explained some of the experiences that they went through. But this is after the Qing Dynasty. This is like in the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, 1980s, up to 1982 when they got the new constitution, and then all the way up to 2004 to 2005 when they implemented some kind of new religion law. And then I talked about like the seminaries, the big five religions. So I had this whole like framework of like what happened in history, and then like what are some changes that China could think about, consider in order to continue the process of opening up. What is the difference between freedom of religion and freedom of religious thought compared to freedom of religious action, where people's action are going to be a reflection of what's happening in the community. Now, at the time and now, like I don't know, because you hear about history, you hear about something like what were those opium wars, and like what was going on in world history, and then and you kind of like separate yourself from that was way back then, and like okay, but what's happening now? So what was the excuse of America for bombing Iran, and like what is the justification there exactly? Like why is it that Iran, like that Israel and America get to just continue to kill people in Lebanon and Iran? What's the justification? Like, what is the reason? Oh, there's a chance that they might get nuclear weapons. Okay, lots of countries have nuclear weapons. Oh yeah, but no. But these guys are different because they'll use it. It's like okay, but so why doesn't North Korea use their nuclear weapon? They have it. So it's like, what's the justification? No, but these guys are crazy. But I thought you killed all the crazy ones. I thought all the crazy ones are dead now. So it's like, okay, so we just want to bomb them. And that's what I came at. That's what I got out of this presentation. All right, so we got two fantasies making reality impossible to see. The Chinese Mirage. Now, the book is called The China Mirage. That's the one that we're going to be looking at today. And we're going to go into the book and then we're going to kind of like go, I don't know, we got a problem because I looked into the curriculum that our AI created for us. And it looks like we're going to be in China Mirage chapter 1. And then we got China Mirage chapter 1. And then we got China Mirage chapter 1. And then we got China Mirage chapter 1. What? So it's crazy. Like, because I was listening to the book and I listened to the first three chapters, and I made two presentations from the first three chapters. So that kind of like removes a huge portion of our curriculum really quick. Like, all right, so let's do it. So the Chinese Mirage, the center of civilization. All outsiders are barbarians seeking our superior wisdom. The Western Mirage, a backward pagan empire waiting to be saved, civilized, and profited from. Okay, so it looks like from the picture you have the Westerners, they're looking into China, but there's some kind of separation where they can't really see into China. And then the Chinese are inside of China and they can't really see outside of China. So there's this barrier. The most consequential geopolitical relationship in modern history was built on two distinct fantasies, each making the other impossible to correct. A worldview built on a millennium of supremacy, demographic dominance, population tripled in the 18th century from 100 million to over 300 million, larger than all of Europe combined. Total economic autonomy, total economic autonomy. Our celestial empire possesses all things in prolific abundance and lacks no product within its borders. One way global demand. The entire world demanded Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. China demanded absolutely nothing in return. This was not baseless arrogance. It was a rational conclusion drawn from thousands of years of genuine superiority over every encountered civilization. Maybe this gives us some kind of clue, some hint about a topic that we talked about last week in the video, which is that China just decided at some point that they were going to build all their or burn down all their ships, and they said, "Stop going abroad. There's no reason to go abroad. Why are you going abroad? Like, it's just a waste of." Maybe it has something to do with like when you look at the Portuguese and the Spanish, like they were going into other countries and they were kind of like cultivating the civilizations, and then they were turning them into slaves, and then they were like they were stealing or taking their goods. And so like these were robbers. And the Chinese, they I guess that they were going to other countries, they were doing some trading, and then okay, then we did some trade, but then like we didn't get there wasn't anything great outside of China to get. It's just like why? Like these are fantasy trips that are not profitable. So why don't we just stay in our own country? I mean, I thought last week that it was more about this absolute totalitarianism, but then now it's starting to give this another like, okay, maybe it's just practically like, why are we going abroad? It's a waste of resources. Absolute geometry of imperial power, comparison metrics. So the European system versus the Chinese system regarding authority, European system, permanent divine right of kings. The Chinese system, the conditional mandate of heaven. Rebellion is a sin against God. The Chinese system, rebellion is proof that heaven has transferred its favor to a new ruler. Diplomacy, peer-to-peer nation states. Chinese system, every foreigner is a supplicant. No peer exists. Now that's kind of interesting. The idea, the proof that heaven has transferred its favor to a new ruler, which means that it sounds like this. I mean, if this ideology was present in like more than one dynasty, because we're talking about a history of thousands and thousands of years. So, I mean, was this just at this time, or was this like over hundreds of years? So, like, what is this idea, the proof that heaven has transferred its favor to a new ruler? Where as opposed to like, let's slaughter all the people. I mean, that's different. Cosmic warning. The ultimate sin, the ultimate sign that an emperor was losing heaven's mandate was a visible inability to discipline barbarians. Therefore, yielding to foreign demands was never just a diplomatic concession, it was an external cosmic crisis. So that's like one of the ways they judge the like whether the current emperor should remain in control. Now, the interesting thing about this book, and I actually purposely removed it from the slides, it really talks about Roosevelt. There's a guy named Delano Roosevelt, and this guy is like a drug dealer. He's like 100% drug dealer. And then from the drug money, it talks about America and like Yale University. Even it talks about, what is it, the Bone Thugs in Harmony, that they in Yale University, that in fact this money, the original money, comes from the drug trade. And so, and then it like talks about all these different like organizations and societies in America that were propped up through drug money. The geography of cultural quarantine. And I kind of left that out of the presentation. If you read the book, then you'll see it's like, oh, okay, this is crazy. This is really crazy. But I think we'll probably run up against this idea in a couple of slides. Number one, physical confinement. Foreign traders restricted entirely to warehouses outside the city walls. Entering Canton meant severe punishment. Number two, temporal restrictions. The trading season lasted only 4 months. Afterward, all barbarians were forced to leave the country. Three, intellectual embargo. Teaching a foreigner the Chinese language was classified as a capital offense. The canton system was not trade, it was meticulously managed quarantine designed to let Chinese goods out while keeping Chinese civilizations hermetically sealed. So you can see at this point, they have these like serious, like they have walls. We're keeping the barbarians out. Okay, but what happened? They tried to keep the barbarians out, and guess what happened? The unsustainable global wealth transfer. Inelastic demand. The British factory worker class developed a massive, unbreakable addiction to Chinese tea. The silver drain. The total self sufficiency of the Middle Kingdom meant Europe had nothing to value to trade. Silver vaults in London were rapidly emptying to pay for tea. Westbound trade. Ships laden with heavy crates of tea, silk, and porcelain. Eastbound trade. Ships carrying only raw European and American silver. China's greatest strength, its total economic independence, became the exact justification for one of the most destructive commercial strategies in human history. This is also similar to right now because there's a lot of scholarship in America that is saying like one of the issues of China is they need to increase their consumption, because the thing is that because of this trade imbalance, then like the reason why America can keep buying all of these Chinese goods is because they're printing money. They're just printing $40 trillion. Well, what does $40 trillion really represent? It represents the desire for China to have access to this American dollar. And once they get the American dollar, then they can funnel the money back into the American system. They're putting it into the American stock market. They're putting it into American real estate. They're propping up prices. So all of these, it's like this cycle, but it has some relationship to what's going on in here, because in here there was also a situation where the world demanded Chinese goods, and all of the money was going back to China. And so when you have this gigantic trade imbalance, then eventually the people start to feel poor. And when they start to feel poor, like, okay, we need all of our goods, all the goods come from China and they're getting all of our money. And then guess what happens? Financial engineering through state-sponsored addiction. Step one, Britain to India. British capital pays 1 million Indian farmers to grow opium cheaply. By 1850, illegal opium accounted for 15 to 20% of the entire British Empire's revenue. Step two, India to China. The East India Company ships the contraband to the Chinese coast using offshore islands to evade the Canton system. Step three, China to Britain. Chinese criminals network distribute the drug. The silver flow abruptly reverses, pouring out of China and back into London. The British government used the East Indian Company as the legal fiction to pretend London was not directly breaking Chinese law. So this is what now the question is, like, what is going to be the new opium war? Because obviously there's going to be, America is desperately looking for a way to to stop this trade imbalance situation, and the question is, like, how are they going to do it? Legal sequel of American Century. The monopoly locked out out of British India, American firms like Russell and Company established a virtual monopoly on smuggling Turkish opium into Canton. Okay, so now we got so the British they're growing the opium in India, and the Americans they start working with Turkey. The competence young Americans could secure competence 100,000 profit before age 30, operating on margins of 37.5%. Institutional legacy, real estate, transport, Americans' first railroads, Boston's Athenaeum, Manhattan waterfronts, academia, foundational wealth from Yale, Princeton, Columbia. The fortunes that built the East Coast elite were entirely absent from the thousands of pages of respectable letters that these merchants sent home. All right, so these guys, like all these East Coast elite families in the government and in academia and all these institutions, they were like, "Hey, we're doing business with China," but actually they're all drug dealers. Which then the question is like, okay, but what about now? How about our modern elite? What are they doing? Are they part of this same system? A moral argument answered by modern artillery. A moral argument. We have heard that in your own country, opium is prohibited. This is strong proof that you know how hurtful it is. If foreigners brought opium into England and seduced your people to smoke it, would you not look upon such a procedure with anger? Industrial response. Queen Victoria's answer to this impeccable legal and moral argument was to dispatch the Royal Navy and bombard the Chinese coast. Commissioner Lean was right on every moral point, but he had no cannons. The Great Wall had nothing to say to artillery firing from the sea. So the first they send the drugs, and then when their government says, "Hey guys, could you stop that?" Then they came back and start shooting them. Right. So this is our Great Britain. I'm from one of the colonies of Great Britain, and this is what our ancestors did, carving new Chinas from the Middle Kingdom. The architecture of unequal treaties, abolishing containment. The Canton system is destroyed. The borders are forcefully opened. Extraterritoriality. Foreigners operating in treaty ports are immune to Chinese law, tried only by their own consuls. The irony, the American consul overseeing U.S. legal jurisdiction in China was simultaneously the head of the largest American opium smuggling operation. Huh. You see that? These United States of America. The empire that spent millennia controlling who entered its borders was now an archipelago of foreign jurisdiction on its own soil. All right, so eventually there was like eight countries. I mean, I guess Austria-Hungary is not really a country anymore, but there were like eight countries that came in and developed uh, concessions. I used to live in the French concession. I lived in a little house. It was built in 1920 in the French concession when I first working for a law firm called King and Wood. This was before it created a joint venture with the Australian law firm. And one time, I was working with Zhang Yi. At the time, he was the managing partner of the Shanghai office, and he drove me home one day. And he's like, "You live here?" And I was like, "Yeah." And our other interns, they're like they live in nothing. They don't have any luxury at all in their life. And I was just like, "Oh yeah." I was like wearing like a tailored $500 suit, going up to my French home, and as an intern, it was unsustainable. The complete humiliation of the oldest empire. The checklist of humiliation, uh, forced permanent legalization of the opium trade, English mandated as the official language of all treaties, unrestricted navigation of foreign gunboats up the Yangtze River into China's deep interior, abolishment of the Barbarian Management Bureau. The civilization that had called everyone else barbarians was forced at gunpoint by treaty to formally stop using the word. So, I mean, like, that's kind of like irony, right? Like, because they called them barbarians, and then like they came in and messed things up. So, I mean, the foreigners proved that they actually were barbarians. But the issue was that they couldn't stop them. Why? And the other interesting thing, like when you go back into the other videos, you see that the British they took that gunpowder and then they learned how to use it, and then they had cannons because actually it was because of religion, because of their bell towers, they were able to create these iron cannons, and then they were able to turn it into a precision tool, and then once they had a precision tool, come back to the middle kingdom, and it's like a combination of, religion and Chinese technology, and then they come back as barbarians with magical tools. So the problem with having a barbarian is that if they have magical tools, they can be very powerful. The cosmic collapse of the mandate, the anatomy of systematic failure, social decay, opium corrupted officials, demoralized the soldiery, and caused rampant inflation, loss of divine permission. In the Chinese system, inability to repel invaders was not just strategic loss, it was empirical proof that heaven withdrew its mandate from the Qing dynasty. The foreign powers didn't just take Hong Kong and Shanghai, they stripped the dynasty of something infinitely more valuable, the appearance of heaven's favor. So then this kind of like shows us like when we look at the propaganda of America and Canada, Western world, like what did we hear about Russia? And I've spent an awful lot of time speaking to Russians in the last couple of years, particularly in the last 6 months. There's one gentleman that I've been talking to who he's a former parliamentarian in the Russian system, and he grew up in this system in the Soviet Union, and he's really opposed to the what was happening, and he's really pro democratic. And so it's been so interesting talking to him and listening to his perspectives. Then, but so you can honestly say like there were some issues in the Soviet Union, and then the question is that what did China go through? Because they believed that heaven was on their side, and then they had this, they experienced this, and then after experiencing this, they turned to communism. Did they choose to turn to communism? What is the deal? What was the issue? Like I'm sure we're going to learn about that eventually. It has something to do with expelling the Japanese out of their country. It had something to do with their fallen empire. So you have these empire after empire after empire, and then the collapse of their society at gunpoint. The Crusaders' fantasy: win the leaders, win China. The Chinese could not understand why they should embrace an exclusive white god. The missionaries could not understand why the Chinese did not understand. The illusion of conversation, the strategy armed with absolute certainty but zero knowledge of Chinese culture, language, or Confucian philosophy. Missionaries believed they could rewrite a 3,000-year-old civilization. The reality check. Reverend Sidon Stricker spent 10 years preaching concepts of sin and guilt to an ancient culture that did not hold those concepts. He made exactly 10 converts in a decade. And this is an interesting point. I remember when I first arrived in China, and I grew up in a LDS household, a very like bubble type of family. But then I went to public school where we didn't have like any Mormons in my school, and so I had like these two worlds. I had this world of like non-Mormon, and then I had this world of Mormon, and I could see that these two different worlds were completely different from each other, and they had different values. They had different understanding of things. And so then, right in China, it's like a sea of black hair as far as I could see. And then I start talking to these people, and it's like, you believe in God? Okay, yeah. I mean, it took me a long time to kind of like go through the different stages of belief. I didn't necessarily consider myself a Christian when I first went to China. Um, it took me a long time to become a Christian, and then even after I became Christian, I still wasn't necessarily that like believing of my own faith. It took me even longer to develop an understanding of a perspective of like what did I actually believe. So I can see for me, like growing up in the system, and it took me like 40, 42 years before I really felt strongly about my tradition. So, come on, the Chinese, how? The contradiction, the Statue of Liberty couldn't answer. Okay, so now the book, it's quite interesting that after this story of like the Opium Wars in China and Christianity in China and things like that, then it brings us back to America, and it's explaining that there's like a bunch of Chinese that come to America. They start helping the Americans to build the nation. You can see it's just the 1860s building the nation. Chinese laborers suspended on ropes, blasting through the impossible granite of the Sierra Nevada to build the transcontinental railroad, succeeding where white laborers had failed. And then in the 1980s, we have the exclusion era. The Chinese must go. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first U.S. law to exclude human beings based specifically on race. Rock Springs Massacre in 1885. White miners burned Chinatown and killed residents in cold blood. 16 men charged, zero convictions. Just 4 years after passing the Exclusion Act, America dedicated the Statue of Liberty. The irony went entirely unremarked. And that's the thing. It's like when you start to go back into history, it's really messy. So first you have like the actual China, and then so you went into China, you sold them drugs, and then when they tried to like fight back, then you took bigger guns and then you slaughtered them. And then some of these Chinese people somehow they made it to America and they helped you to build your country, and then you got angry because they're working harder than you, right? So is this what we're this is like this is exactly what's happening right now. So China is becoming successful again. They're working harder, and like the question is, what is America going to do? Like I know that they're putting up these sanctions because they're hoping to when they raise the sanction bar, then the Chinese they have to make a decision about what are they going to do with their factory. If you have to cross through customs, then it means your product becomes more expensive. And so I don't know, like how long are they going to wait? Are they going to wait for Trump to be? I think they're going to wait until after the midterm elections because if Trump loses, what is it? How do they say it? If he loses the midterm election and then there's some kind of impeachment procedure, then I think this will unlock a lot of Chinese investment. Okay, how? Well, because the thing is that when Trump makes policies, when Trump does things, then it doesn't necessarily represent what Trump's thinking. It represents the hive of the American mindset. And so, like, yeah, maybe Trump he tries to create the situation where there's all these sanctions, but then at the end of the day, when the next president comes in, takes control, it doesn't mean that they're going to reverse those policies. And so the question is, how do we get investment into America? Well, so there's the argument is that maybe sanctions are necessary, and then the second question is, what is it going to take in order to force the Chinese to increase domestic consumption? Anyways, it looks like it's going to be a bloody war. The ultimate strategy disguised Japan's pivot. Now, all right. So in the next video, in the next presentation, we're going to pivot to Japan. Um, so I don't want to go too deeply into this right now because we're going to go really deep into this in the next presentation. So let's just say that we're sleepwalking toward the 20th century. The American Mirage, China believes China is a helpless patient awaiting salvation, and Japan is loyal proxy spreading Anglo-Saxon civilization. Japanese Mirage believes donning the disguise of Western civilization guarantees equal treatment and backing of their own Asian empire. The Chinese Mirage are collapsing Qing dynasty, clinging to the ashes of the cosmological order, completely locked out of determining its own fate. The 20th century in Asia was not driven by rational great power calculation. It was driven by three civilizations operating on entirely false images of each other, moving rapidly to an inevitable, devastating collision. All right, so next time we're going to jump into the next presentation, and it's going to be about this whole Japan part. So I already made the presentation, so probably I'll do it like on Monday or Tuesday. The China Mirage Part 2, Japanese Monroe Doctrine, and the Betrayal of Asia. We'll talk all about Japan. It's going to be wonderful. I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining me here on the Space Between Ideas. I'm Glenn Gates.